it does also have fans that aren't Catalonian, so should that closing of the stadium have occurred for all of their fans, should they have allowed fans that aren't anything to do with the referendum or to do with the political statements being made in Barcelona and in Catalonia at the time? There's again that blurred line of, should politics affect sport on the level that it did there in that situation? It's clear that there's a lot of politics in Spain and a lot of involvement in football and politics in Spain. So Barcelona's rival club is Real Madrid. So Real Madrid claim they have no relation to politics. However, Real Madrid actually got the Real in their name, meaning royal, in 1920 when the Spanish king Alfonso VIII granted them the right to the name. This is obviously a political statement in itself, and it is one of the root causes for such rivalry between Barcelona and Real Madrid. Barcelona is obviously related to Catalonia, and they consider themselves politically different from the rest of Spain, and those Catalonians see Real Madrid as representing the rest of Spain and the monarchy. Hence why there is such division or rivalry between the two clubs, because they have those separate ideologies, and it's deep rooted all the way back to even the 1920s. Now, thousands of Real Madrid supporters also appeared to oppose the referendum on October 1st that I mentioned by waving Spanish flags during a home fixture against Espanyol at the same time as that Barcelona fixture. This was seen as, again, them opposing that Catalonian independence that was being fought for in Barcelona. For Real Madrid to say that they don't have any involvement in politics seems ridiculous when you have acts like that. There seems to be a constant political involvement in football in Spain, and one that seems to not be going away anytime soon, especially as the fight for Catalonian independence is an ongoing one still to this day, which will of course affect Barcelona FC as a club. Would they, if they reach that independence, would they still be able to play in the Spanish leagues? Would they have to play in a different league? There's a lot of controversy around it, and the politics around it is clearly something that is a massive discussion point and something that is massively affecting the sport. Of course, there's always the argument that rivalries make football more interesting. It brings more supporters, I suppose, to the stadiums, as there's a larger atmosphere when there's rivalries occurring. So I suppose in that sense it could be seen as a positive effect of politics in football. However, the overall consensus of that seems to be that politics has a negative impact if it's stopping spectators being able to go to their stadium to watch games, if it's having negative impacts on the spectators themselves and their lives as football fans, spectator violence, of course, through those rivalries as a result of politics in football could be seen as politics being a negative in football, and something that could be argued that politics should not be involved in football. Of course, there are positives and negatives, which is why politics is a massive discussion point. Of course, the politics of countries and nationalities and differences between those nationalities and things like that is one side of the politics in football, but there are also many other issues in politics in football, whether that's gender or whether that's racism, whether that's religion. I'll go on to talk about gender in a lot more detail, because I feel that gender is a massive issue in the current footballing industry. There's a massive division between the genders, and it's a clear issue that needs to be resolved. This obviously doesn't discredit the fact that religion and racism are a massive issue as well, as I will discuss them as well. For the types of politics I've already mentioned, there hasn't really been any specific initiatives to change anything. Of course, like I said, there have been fines and bans for players that use politics in football, and there are obviously changes in rules around politics in football. But other than that, there haven't really been any initiatives. This is obviously different for other forms of politics, such as racism, as there's certain campaigns within the sport, such as the Kick It Out campaign, where obviously it's saying that we need to kick racism out of football. And that's an ongoing campaign that's very present in today's football as well, due to the issue of racism being so prevalent in today's football. So racism is obviously a massive issue in football. It could be considered related to politics, I suppose, especially when there are campaigns that are run to prevent racism, and certain acts of racism could be linked to politics, or certain acts against racism could be linked to politics, I suppose, in a way. So, for example, Roma handed a lifetime ban to a supporter who racially abused Brazilian defender Juan Jesus on social media. That is a massive step for a club to take action itself on their own supporters. It's something that is rarely done, a lifetime ban. But for Roma to hand that lifetime ban to their own supporter is something so almost monumental in a way, because it paves the way for other clubs to do the same and to act the same. It shows other clubs that they need to step up to the plate and hand the same punishments to their fans if they are acting with racism. Football clubs from the Premier League and around the world should take heed, really, and should follow Roma in this action to kick racism out of football. Other examples of racism, especially recently, so just last week there was actually major issues with racism in a fixture in Bulgaria. So England played Bulgaria as a national fixture just last week. And obviously not all of the Bulgarian fans, but a large amount of Bulgarian fans showed racism towards players such as Raheem Sterling. Now this racism was things such as making monkey noises, racist chants, racist slurs towards the England players, and there's not always been things in place to prevent this in the sport. Obviously it's very hard when stadiums are packed with so many people to get rid of individuals. It's so hard to pick out individuals who are acting with racism and give them those punishments. But recent rule changes have meant that there's methods in place to prevent racism. So there's certain protocols, such as the referee halting the game a certain amount of times. There's constant communication between the referees and the other officials and the coaches and the players. So, for example, one of the England players reported racism to the England captain, Harry Kane, and then he referred this to the referee, who then took action. He halted the game twice, and the final decision was actually down to the England team themselves as to whether they wanted to continue or not, as they were the ones receiving the racial abuse. England decided that they wished to carry on with the game and almost fight racism through them winning the game and thrashing Bulgaria. It kind of gave a political statement in itself by them saying that they were going to play on and beat Bulgaria despite the racism that they were receiving. Since then, leagues such as the Premier League have republicised the Kick It Out campaign, which is obviously an anti-racism campaign, and they have republicised that and majorly drive that campaign recently, creating more adverts surrounding efforts against racism. Again, this could be considered as positive politics in football. These sort of campaigns are seen as positive, as obviously racism is such an awful thing and it really does need to be combated. And unfortunately, racism is a really prominent thing in football, which is why we need campaigns such as the Kick It Out campaign in order to kick it out, quite literally, of the sport. So the political issues that I've already mentioned are not the only issues. Obviously, there's also religious issues within football as well. One small example is the Celtics versus Rangers rivalry. So that's obviously a rivalry rooted by Roman Catholics versus Protestants. And there's a massive rivalry there, which often results in physical fights and that spectator violence that I previously mentioned. This is, of course, not the only religious political issue or case of issues with religion in sport and in football. There are many others. This is obviously just one example. There needs to be an effort to limit the negative implications of these sorts of rivalries and these sorts of political issues. Football shouldn't be about the politics of different religions. It should be about one team against the other. It shouldn't be deep rooted to the politics behind it. At least that's my personal opinion. While some, perhaps Celtics and Rangers fans, find that something that makes the sport more interesting for them. Obviously, there's going to be differing opinions, and no one's ever going to agree on the extent of politics involvement in football. So it's a really tough topic to discuss. Obviously, I said before that gender is a massive political issue as well, but I will go on to talk about that as a separate topic here later on. I will finish up with politics first because it's such an interesting and deep-rooted issue in football, and something that there's not really any method of prevention. It's more an argument of whether it should have involvement or not in football and in sport as a general thing as well, I suppose.